Congress is back in session, and they have a lot on their agenda, including raising the debt ceiling. In a speech at the New York Stock Exchange today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy pledged to raise it, but only if future federal spending is capped at 1%. The White House has called on McCarthy to approve the debt ceiling increase with no strings attached. The speaker criticized the president for not negotiating with him on funding, saying Biden's, quote, missing in action.
Well, good morning. Without exaggeration, American debt is a ticking time bomb that will detonate unless we take serious, responsible action. Yet, how has President Biden reacted to this issue? He has done nothing. So in my view, I think in the rest of America, that's irresponsible. Rather than face the facts, this president has embraced a fantasy that debt doesn't matter, that money can always be created out of thin air.
So for more on all of this, Nikole Killion and Anthony Salvanto join us now. Nikole is CBS News congressional correspondent on Capitol Hill, and Anthony is CBS News executive director of elections and surveys, joining us from New York. Anthony, I want to start with you because you have some new polling. I've been fascinated by how the public is assessing all of this, because these conversations are happening in Washington and New York today. But how is the public thinking about the debt ceiling? Is there wide support for raising it?
Hey there, Caitlin. The short answer is yes, there is, if it means the U.S. doesn't default. Let me walk you through that, which is if you just ask people, do you want to raise the debt ceiling? Do you want to have the government increase its borrowing? Majority of people says no. But if you follow that and you say, well, if not raising it means the U.S. will default, then people go, well, wait a second. And you get 70% of the public says, yeah, raise the debt ceiling in order to avoid default. And look, layering behind that is the fact that people already see a sort of uncertain economy. They don't think it's good. They don't necessarily think it's going to get better moving forward. So the implications of that are what really drives opinion. So yes, they want to raise the debt ceiling, Caitlin.
That's really interesting when you look at the nuances there, and I'm curious kind of how the parties will address that in their messaging. I'm also curious, you have some new polling out today on the Trump investigations, and we saw earlier today the House Judiciary Committee had a field hearing in New York on crime, but really trying to go after District Attorney Alvin Bragg against the latest Trump indictments. How's the public assessing these investigations into the former president?
Yeah, so we asked people broadly, okay, should Republicans in Congress try to do things that would stop the law enforcement's investigations into Donald Trump? And the answer to that, here we go again with partisan splits, but the answer to that is very different for Democrats and independents than it is for Republicans. By and large, the public says no, GOP Congress shouldn't get involved, should let the investigations run its course. But for about half, just over half of Republicans, that answer is yes. And that's partly because they see political motivations behind these investigations, not necessarily just going through the legal process the way others see it. Now, I would add this, Caitlin, because I think it's important for background here. We have seen in the polling an increase since January in the number of Republicans who say that it's very important and somewhat important for the party to be loyal to Donald Trump. So that's up at 46, very important now, 30% somewhat important. And that total there, that 76% in that total is up from, you see that shift, from what it was back in January. Of course, January was prior to him getting indicted. So you see that loyalty, that added importance for that. And I will add this final note, that is largely driven by Republicans who call themselves MAGA, who call themselves part of the MAGA movement. So they're still solidly with the former president, Caitlin.
Very interesting, Anthony, and especially now that Republicans have control of Congress and committees, they can use that to kind of demonstrate that support as well. Anthony Salvanto, as always, thank you very much. And we turn now over to Capitol Hill with Nikole Killion. And Nikole, I want to pick up on what Anthony was just talking about, which is kind of the way in which Republicans have coalesced around Donald Trump in light of these, in light of the indictment. We saw today, as I mentioned, the House Judiciary Committee having that hearing in New York, really to put pressure on Bragg. What kind of message were they hoping to send today?
Well, to your point, I mean, they're looking to keep the pressure on the Manhattan DA. I mean, a lot of this stems from a whole fight between the Judiciary Committee and the district attorney. They've been trying to get him in to sit down for a transcribed interview to get more information and insight as to why he made this decision to indict the former president. But for the most part, Bragg has turned his nose up to that, saying that Congress shouldn't interfere in an ongoing investigation and that they really are kind of stepping outside of their bounds. So there has been this tug of war between the two sides. And so this hearing today was really to try to, in Republicans' views, expose the district attorney and show that he is soft on crime and show why he needs to be held to account. So they had various crime victims who testified at this hearing. But Democrats had a counteroffensive planned and really said that, in their view, Republicans were simply trying to be the defense team for the former president, and that this was really just a political stunt in terms of holding this hearing in New York City earlier today.
And speaking of New York City, I mean, Jordan and his committee weren't the only ones taking a field trip up to New York. Kevin McCarthy, of course, was on Wall Street talking about the debt ceiling, saying that he wants to raise it, but with conditions, that cap on spending. I'm curious, though, because he hasn't really been able to answer whether he can get that through his own party. So I'm curious as to how it's being received on Capitol Hill among Republicans and among Democrats.
Well, I think ahead of the speaker's speech, we did see various factions of the Republican conference put out proposals, many of which kind of touched on the broad outlines that the speaker laid out today, whether that is lifting the debt ceiling for a year, whether that is capping future spending around 1% for the next 10 years, whether that is reclaiming unspent COVID funds or prohibiting the president's student loan forgiveness program. This is all; these are all proposals that we have heard from, for instance, the Main Street Republicans. The House Freedom Caucus has also put forth similar measures, and while they're not all exactly on the same page as of yet, the hope among Republican leadership is that they can again coalesce around something and perhaps try to get it through within the next month. Now, Democrats, for their part, have pushed back against the speaker, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And so I asked him, what's next? What is the game plan here? Because it seems like both sides are kind of talking past each other. Take a listen. At this point, it seems like neither side is blinking. So what is your plan B for a clean debt limit increase?
Plain and simple, as it's been done in the past 3 times under President Trump, under President Biden, Democrats and Republicans came together, bipartisan, and avoided default with no preconditions, no brinksmanship. That's what's going to happen.
The bottom line is that, in terms of the majority leader, he continues to say that Speaker McCarthy needs to present a plan. And Republicans would argue, well, this is our plan, or at least an opening salvo. And so the majority leader was really pushed on, for instance, if the speaker is able to get the votes in order to pass Republicans' plan, if the Senate would take that up, if then serious conversations would ensue. And the Democratic leader continued to just say, well, we'll have to see if it gets through. We'll have to see if it gets the votes, then maybe we'll consider it. So again, at this point, still we see kind of both parties in their respective corners with really not a whole lot of time left to try to settle their differences on the debt limit.
Yeah, Nikole, I mean, the clock is ticking here, and they seem nowhere close to any kind of agreement. So we'll keep an eye on that. Another item happening on Capitol Hill is what to do about Dianne Feinstein. Of course, she's the senior senator from California. She's been absent from the Senate for a little bit of time now, out with the shingles. But you're starting to see Democrats calling for her to leave the Judiciary Committee or be replaced on that committee because they want to get their judges through. How is Schumer and how are Democrats handling this? It seems to be kind of a delicate situation for them.
Well, right now, it's not so much how Democrats are handling it, but how Republicans are handling it. And we are now seeing a growing chorus from a number of Republicans as they return here to Capitol Hill saying that they are opposed to this idea of a temporary replacement. And keep in mind, it's actually Senator Feinstein who called for a temporary replacement, saying that she does hope to return to the Senate, that she has been recovering from shingles. And when her medical team clears her to travel back here to D.C., that she wants to come back. But it's been House Democrats in particular, a few notable ones like Ro Khanna, progressive out of California, who believe that she should just resign altogether. So that is the debate that's been generated here on Capitol Hill. But in the near term, in terms of this temporary replacement for Senator Feinstein, it's really going to come down to whether or not Democrats can get some buy-in from Republicans. And right now, at least out of the gate, it seems many of them are opposed. So this may not be very easy in terms of finding a replacement. And if that is the case, then, kind of the ball goes back to the senator's court in terms of how long she can really afford to stay out.
Yeah, really difficult to see what political incentives are there for Republicans to allow a replacement and then allow judges to get through for the Biden administration. But we will see how that plays out. Nikole Killion, a lot happening on Capitol Hill as Congress comes back into session. Thank you so much for your reporting.